Yeah, thank you. Let me see if, am I on? Great, great. Hey folks, if you're just coming in, there's a handout. Good morning. There's a handout on the ledge. I spoiled you for a while and I pulled the table in here. But now I'm making you reach on the ledge to get your handout. So you can tell we're getting close to the finale of this class. Yeah, if that's okay. Actually, I'm going to put it right here, actually. Okay, no, I'll put it out of the way. Yeah, leave it. So pro-choice, pro-abort arguments number 2 is the handout today. And just as an appetizer, we're going to deal with one of the most, some have called the most paralyzing argument that the pro-choice people make. So we're going to deal with that in today's class. So as you're coming in, I've noticed that since the coffee returned, we've had more tardiness for class. It's okay. I get it. If I would be back there with you, had I not already had 3.5 cups, so I'm wired. First cup was really early this morning. I do believe that coffee is probably hidden in the Greek somewhere as a step to sanctification. Maybe, maybe not. Feels like it. What? Yeah, you're right. I was reading a biography once about R.A. Torrey. R.A. Torrey was the assistant for D.L. Moody for years, took over for D.L. Moody after D.L. Moody died. And R.A. Torrey, in his biography, there's this moment where late at night, he wakes up and he begins to cry out to the Lord, I'll give it up, I'll give it up, I surrender, I'll give it up. And there's just a footnote in the biography. It doesn't tell you anymore. So of course you're intrigued about what did he give up? You go down to the footnote, and it was horrible conviction. I almost didn't finish the biography. It was coffee. No is right. Now you don't think of R.A. Torrey like you used to. See, I had the same problem. I was like, he was a man of God until now. So just so you know, forewarn you, if you read a biography by R.A. Torrey, you may come upon it too. I was convicted till the next morning when I needed my coffee. Maybe it was just for Lent. Oh yeah, maybe. Probably R.A. Torrey had nothing to do with Lent, I'm thinking. Can we get those back doors closed? Anybody mind just shutting those? That way folks that are in the foyer won't be distracted by what we're doing in here. You should have a handout that says answering, and I don't know why there's a space between the S and W, pro-choice, pro-abort arguments 2. And today, as I said, we're going to deal with one of the arguments that I believe is the most challenging, maybe the most paralyzing if you hear it. I've heard of some of my favorite pro-life apologists who, when they were given this argument during a debate, they didn't know exactly what to say. So I'm just setting it up there. It is a big one. So today we're going to deal with just one big argument. And I know some of you are saying, well, what about those other ones that were still left on the handout last week? We're going to get to those, okay? But I thought I would front end this one because it's so important, and I don't want us to miss it. All right, I'm going to lead us in prayer, and then we'll get going. Does anybody have prayer requests that I could bring before the Lord for you? Of course, we want to be mindful of the Ukrainians right now. And also, we need to be mindful of the Russians right now. Those of you that know Russians, there are most of them, I would say, are completely opposed to what's going on. And they're being pulled into this. And so not only does my heart break, and I'm sure yours does for the Ukrainians, but also for those Russians who are being represented by such ruthlessness right now. And pray for wisdom for leaders, not only ours, but for world leaders in terms of how to respond. Anything else that you have that I can pray for this morning? Okay, I'm taking that as a no. All right, let me lead us. Father, thank you for allowing the bronze to safely arrive here in the United States yesterday afternoon. I know they're concerned, and I think they're in the middle of a building project for the church there in Perm, Russia, and leaving a ministry that they're not sure they'll be able to return to has got to be devastating and heartbreaking. And I ask, Lord, you give them grace today as they worship, I think, at High Point this morning. Lord, I ask that you would help us as your people to encourage them with gifts and help as they've left most of what they own in Russia. And I ask, Lord, that you would please intervene in this horrible injustice that's taking place. I've all heard perhaps the interviews of the Ukrainians, those that are bunkered down and fearful, those that have tried to escape the country but have been prevented. Lord, we don't know exactly how to pray except for to ask you again to thwart this invasion, to stop them, confuse them. Lord, I ask that you would give strength to the people there in such a horrible, tragic situation. We ask for supernatural protection for them. We ask, Lord, for the Russians as well, who are part of this unwillingly. And we ask for judgment on Vladimir Putin and those that are around him that are also agreeing to what they're doing. We ask again, Lord, for your help, your intervention. And we pray that we would know how we can encourage, how we can participate in being somewhat of a help to those that are in such danger right now. Lord, we really are confused about how we can. So we come to you, who is in charge of all things, and ask you to help and intervene. Lord, we pray for our class today, that you would bless it. Thank you for these folks and their willingness to keep coming back. And we pray today that you would equip us to have conversations that will lead to change of mind, change of heart. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. By far, the biggest argument that you will hear, it's kind of in a catchphrase. You've probably seen it on T-shirts or bumper stickers. It's my choice, right? Okay? So how do we answer that? Now, just as an aside, some of you are still, like me, a little bit lathered up and frosted up over what we have just lived through, because there's part of us that would like to sarcastically say, if this is the way you would like to live your life, and this ideology is supreme, if it's my body and my choice, then why are you telling me that I have to get a vaccination and I have to do this and that? Okay, so I'm not going there, but I know some of you are thinking it, and I see the contradiction myself. But besides that contradiction, I do want to ask the question, how do we properly answer this argument? Because it's argument, I'm going to show it to you a little later, it's called the Violinist Argument that has been proposed, and I want us to answer that. So here's the argument. No one is allowed to use my body to sustain their life without my permission. So it's a pretty clear argument that you will hear and encounter many times by pro-choice, pro-abort advocates. They will say, it's my body, it's my choice, and here's the bottom line. No one is allowed to use my body to sustain their life without my permission. I love this quote by Peter Hitchens. He says, but the baby which may die because of your choice also has a body. How hard is this to grasp? On the basis of your own argument, the two rights conflict and are irreconcilable. So this is a truth that we've already talked about, but for a woman to say, it's my body, it's my choice, is to assume something. We've talked about an argumentation called begging the question. What are they begging in this statement? It's my body, it's my choice. They're assuming what? The baby has no choice. The baby has no what? Body, okay? No right, no body, no choice. So they're assuming by the statement, that's what we mean by begging the question. Begging the question is when I make a statement, I make an argument, and I assume that my position is already right. Everybody understand that? We've gone over that a few times. So Peter Hitchens here is saying that is illogical because you are saying that you have a choice because you have a body, and nobody's denying that you have a body. Yes? Okay? So we're not saying you don't have a body. We're saying, yes, you have a body, But there's somebody else that has a body, and somebody else that also ought to have human rights. Now, let's talk about this bodily autonomy argument. So if you're taking notes, and if you're coming in late, you didn't know this, I had the handouts back on the ledge there, so feel free to pick one up if you want. Bodily autonomy argument. Now, the bodily autonomy argument is the same argument that I highlighted at the beginning. No one is allowed to use my body to sustain their life without my permission. But what we want to do in discussion about the bodily autonomy argument is to talk about a hierarchy of rights. A hierarchy of rights. Now, we haven't discussed this in here, to my knowledge. When I say a hierarchy of rights, we're talking about all human rights, all human equal human rights that we enjoy. Would you agree that some of those rights are prioritized over others? Help me think about that. Okay, so good and loud, Glenn. They should be. You think they all should be equal in value, no hierarchy. So your right to vote and your right not to be killed are on the same plane? So you're saying that all rights are equal? Or would you say, no, some rights are more fundamental and more important than other rights? You want to redo? Well, I think the equality there is saying all humans should enjoy them. But in the midst of those equal rights that all humans should enjoy, are there some rights that are more fundamental, more foundational, that should be prioritized above other rights? And let's talk about which rights, and I just threw one at you, voting rights versus the right to life. Can we distinguish some other rights that we would put on the priorities? Okay, so your pursuit of happiness ends at my pursuit of happiness, or my right to life? Correct. So if you didn't hear that, Bill says his right to pursue happiness, driving 100 miles an hour. I'm not going to ask the family if that's ever happened. But that, if he were to mow me down and take my life's value is more valuable than your right to pursue happiness by breaking the speed limit and going 100 miles an hour. Other examples of hierarchy here. I just want us to think this through, okay? This will help you in discussion. You want to establish that that person who's saying, my body, my choice, that while you agree on some level that it is her body and she does have the right to make choices about her body, that there's a hierarchy of rights. So give me some other ones. We've got speeding. Shannon. What's that? Right to eat versus what? What would be another right that would be lower than that? Correct. I think we keep coming back to there's a fundamental, most important right, and what is it? The right to life, okay? It's foundational. Some of you would say, Second Amendment. Okay, well, but if you don't have life, you're not going to get to enjoy the what? Okay, so what good is the right to bear arms if you don't have any arms, okay, or you're not alive, okay? You know what I'm saying? So we understand what we want to establish in this discussion is that there is a hierarchy of rights. There are some rights that are more fundamental and foundational than the one that you're referring to. While you say, it's my body, my choice, there is a hierarchy of rights. Now here's Randy Alcorn. He has got a wonderful book on pro-life, and I would encourage you to pick up anything by Randy Alcorn on this topic. But he says here, the comparison between babies' rights and mother's rights is unequal. What is at stake in abortion is the mother's rights as opposed to the baby's life. That's some profundity right there. So he's saying, okay, so you're talking about your right to make decisions about your body, which we're not going to deny you or argue that you don't have autonomy when it comes to your choices about your body, but we're not equal conversation here, because what is Alcorn's point here? What are we talking about are the consequences for the baby? Death, okay? Very good point. And then we also want to help the person that we're having this discussion with understand that there's no such thing as absolute bodily autonomy. Do we all agree with that? Or do some of us actually think that we have absolute bodily autonomy? It doesn't take a lot here to help somebody see this. One illustration you could use is to ask the person, this is a simple one that I've used, ask the person, so if do you believe that I have the right to swing my arm? Yeah, you have the right to swing your arm anytime you want. Now, if I swing my arm and my arm actually with a closed fist hits your face, do I still have the right to swing my arm anytime I want to and anywhere I want to? Well, the answer is no. And here's the quote: "My rights stop where your rights begin." So here's kind of a controlling principle that you could state in this discussion. My rights end where your rights begin. So I can have autonomy, but once my autonomy of rights violates your rights, that's where they end. Everybody with me, tracking on this? Pretty simple principle. And here are a couple illustrations. One is, do we have the right, is it 18 or 21? Do you have the right, 21? Is 18. When can you drink alcohol? Okay, 20, 21, 21, 20, 18, 21. Okay, sometime. So once you're at legal age and you can drink alcohol, that is a right that you have in our society, yes? Okay. Do you also have the right, after drinking more than you should, to get behind and operate a vehicle? Now, the bodily autonomy argument, if it's taken out to its logical conclusion, is nothing should inhibit my rights, okay? So not even if I'm under the influence of alcohol should you tell me that I can't enjoy my right to drive. I should be able to do that. Now, we understand that you will be incarcerated, charged with driving under the influence if you do that, right? Because what the law is saying is your rights end where my rights, what? Begin. So no one should be driving out on the roads unaware that someone who is gassed, inebriated, under the influence is coming at them on a 2-lane road, right? That shouldn't happen because your rights end where my rights begin. The other one is this illustration of this drug. I think I'm saying it right. Thalidomide. Am I saying it right? Thalidomide. Which my understanding is this can help with nausea, but it can be deadly for a baby. I'm not sure if I understand it all, but I'm going to use it as an illustration. Even if it's not proper, let's act like I know what I'm talking about, okay? So it can cause birth defects. Okay, so that's what it can cause. My understanding isn't too far off. So let's imagine that a woman is saying, you know what, I am really struggling in this first trimester, second trimester with nausea, so I'm going to take this drug because I'm told that this drug will help me from being nauseous. Now, if you are counseled and told this can very possibly cause birth defects with your child, what is the responsibility for this mom at this point in terms of rights? It's a good illustration. Come on, help me. Not to take it, because to take it would be irresponsible, particularly if it were to harm the child, right? So again, this is an illustration. If you're having a conversation and you're trying to get them away from the bodily argument that this is my body. Now, remember, we're always wanting to get back to on topic or what? Off topic. Now, this one seems to start where? Off topic or on topic? Seems to be off topic, but when you start talking about body versus body and actually a human person versus a non-human person, we can get this back on topic real quickly. Do you see what I'm saying? So the next step in the conversation, and I hope you're listening well because we're going to practice this in a little bit. Do the preborn have a right to another's body? That should be a question mark. Do the preborn have a right to another's body? Now, this is all about the it's my body. No one is allowed to use my body to sustain their life without my permission. I'm now going to give you the paralyzing argument that is often used, and it was first given by a woman by the name of Judith Jarvis Thompson. It's called the Violinist Analogy. How many of you have heard it? Okay, all right, so some of you, this will be the first time, the Violinist Analogy. So I want to give you their best argument and prepare you to answer their best argument. I think this is their best. And I say that not because I'm the greatest pro-life apologist, but the ones that I respect the most in pro-life apology say that this is the best. So here we go. Here is the Violinist Analogy. The story goes this way. Imagine you wake up and you're in a hospital. You went to sleep in your bedroom. You wake up in a hospital bed. And beside you is another human person, a human being. And now they are attached to you. They're attached to you by wires and hoses and all kinds of things. You can't even turn over completely in this bed in the hospital because this person is there. They're unconscious at this moment, but they're there. Now, imagine what your first response would be. I've thought about that. My first response would be to yell, perhaps to pull the plugs out and try to get away. But let's imagine before you can respond physically, the doctor comes in and says, calm down, calm down. I know you're afraid. I need to tell you what happened. We would never do this in any other situation, but last night you were kidnapped by a group of people called the Society for Music Lovers. They kidnapped you because the person that's right here, they give him a name, or her, and they say, greatest violinist in the world. And they were in need of we'll say a kidney or some other vital organ, and they were going to die immediately if they were not attached to you. And you had the right blood type, you had everything that worked perfectly for them to hook you up. So they found that out through a database. They kidnapped you last night while you were asleep. They attached you to the greatest violinist in the world so that this Society for Music Lovers, they will be able to save the life of their favorite violinist. And you were chosen to be that person. And we're sorry that you didn't get a choice in the matter, but we chose for you. And here's the good news. This is not forever, only 9 months. 9 months, you'll need to be attached to this violinist right here. You can't move. But then after that, we're going to unattach you, and the violinist will live, and you'll have your life back. Now, you can see the analogy. The analogy is basically, why should any person, number one, be kidnapped without their knowledge, and without their volition or choice, be attached to another body, and if they're unattached, the person dies? What are they comparing it with? Okay, as you know, they're comparing it with the gestation period of a child in the mother's womb for 9 months. Now, let's just start with the illustration before you look at the points that I've given you, and I want to know your initial thoughts. Do you give them what do you give them, A, B, or C on a pretty cool analogy? I give them an A. I don't know what you give them. It's a pretty good analogy. That's going to require some thought. But this argument, this analogy, this is the beauty of it. I've heard other apologists say they take all the pro-choice arguments and they kind of weave it into this analogy, and it's become their favorite. And so if you've never heard it before, you may not hear it again in terms of them giving you the illustration, but all of the pro-choice, pro-abort arguments are kind of weaved into this illustration. Someone having to use their body to sustain the life of somebody that they didn't have a choice in the matter, and they don't want to have any body, like the argument says, to sustain their life without their permission. So let's start breaking it apart. I just want to see where you go. You've just heard the story. Let's imagine you're in a formal debate and you're sitting over taking notes going, oh, Lord, help me. That might be your reaction. Take me home, Jesus. I got to answer this. So where would you go first? Let's just start picking it apart. Then I'm going to give you some ideas. Right. Mm-hmm. First answer that I was going to share, go ahead and write this down because Rick's already given it to us. Responsibility for our choices. And hopefully that one stuck out to you first, okay? Now, let's set aside for a moment those that are victims of rape, okay? Just set aside for the discussion. When you look at the statistics, that's a very minute number of abortions, okay? All right, so that's the one that they pro-aborts and pro-choice people, advocates, like to throw at you immediately. But if we're going to have an honest conversation, we have to say statistically that's a rare thing. Can we set that aside for a moment and talk about the abortions that take place because a person doesn't want to carry the baby for 9 months or doesn't think that they're at the point of life, stage of life where they could have a child, right? So the first point we're going to make is there's a big difference between waking up, finding a body attached to you in a hospital, and waking up and finding you're pregnant. Because generally speaking, there's a series of choices that are made, and most human beings, most adults, understand that one of the, and I use their word, one of the consequences of sexual relationships could be a child being procreated, all right? Okay, so this is a great place to start. We can say, hey, your analogy doesn't take into account personal what? Responsibility, personal choices. It would be like, and I may or may not have done this before, we lived in the city in Greenwood, South Carolina, and there were times where my only brother, we would play baseball together, too close to a neighbor's house. And let's imagine, I'm not saying that this happened or didn't happen, but let's imagine that as I was hitting the baseball, it went through my neighbor's window and shattered. One of those big bay, beautiful bay windows. Let's imagine that happened. Again, I'm not saying that it did or didn't, but let's imagine that it happened. And let's imagine that I go over to my neighbor and I say, you know what, I want to be responsible here, but I intended to play baseball. I intended to play baseball with my brother, but I never intended to break your bay window, so I'm not going to pay for it. But I just want to let you know that it was unintentional, even though I intentionally played baseball close to your house, right? So what we're trying to do in our discussion is to help the person see that there is a big difference between waking up and having a violinist attached to you with no choices of your own. You were kidnapped. Somehow they put you out where you were comatose, where they could attach the other person to you. Whereas when you were pregnant, in most cases, there were responsible choices that were made. And now you're required to make some responsible choices. Good. What else would you say, this argument, this analogy that's just been given to you, that is saying, hey, you would not expect, this is how they typically end this story. You would not expect for that person to agree, just because a doctor came in and says the Society for Music Lovers kidnapped you, would you agree that that person is not mandated to have to stay connected to this violinist? I mean, if they choose, I would rather not give 9 months in this bed to this violinist. I might even like violin music. I might even be a music lover myself, but I do not want to give 9 months of my life to save this person. I'm unplugging him. Is that person responsible? Should they be legally held responsible for taking that life? Well, this is the analogy. And when you say no, which we would say, that's where they go, gotcha. You see what I'm saying? This is what they do with the analogy. So I want you to know how they get you. So first thing is responsibility. What else would you say? That's not a fair comparison between the violinist and abortion. So Janine says that saying that a typical pregnancy means being on your back for 9 months and being unable to leave a bed with a body beside you is not the same. And she's exactly right. So one, I would say this would be a strengthening argument would be to push back and say you're comparing something with something, and the old adage, you're comparing apples and oranges. This is not the same thing. Shannon. What you're wired up to them. The way the analogy goes is there's some life-giving, sustaining power by them being connected to your body. They kind of keep it, somewhat opaque and somewhat unclear, I should say, because the analogy is to say they need your body. That's where the analogy is. That's where the comparison is. Yeah, well, Shannon, I think you're kind of, I'm going to give you the second point here because I think you're kind of on that line of thought. You want to say something, Glenn? You're back there laughing. I see. So Glenn's, so Glenn is going to remove himself from the abortion discussion and say, so we can wheel a deal here. What are you offering? And Diane just shakes her head. Glenn, I love you. Pushback, yes. Okay, they're giving up ground by using this analogy. You do agree that here's a similarity where we agree. This is a real-life person who is completely dependent on the other person in order to live. I didn't think about that. That's a good point to make. We can say, hey, let's look in for common ground here. You know what? We do agree. Your analogy makes a point that I like to make often, that the unborn are real persons. Just like a violinist that's laying in bed beside you, that you had no responsibility or volition or choice to have plugged up to you, is a real person. Very good point. I hadn't thought about that. That's a great thing to say, hey, well, while we're at it, let's go ahead and turn this on you. Tim. I got to give you my blank now because you guys are basically taking my argument, you and Shannon. Ordinary care versus extraordinary care is my second argument. Exactly on point. John. Okay, again, you're coming at this from a totally different angle than I thought about, you and Bill. Okay, so if I understand you right, you're just kind of again saying, okay, let's talk about something totally different. The violinist didn't have a choice in the matter. So help me clarify for me how you see that as being used in the discussion. Well, I think that the analogy is that the violinist had fallen ill, and without being attached to the body, our body, they wouldn't survive. But I think I am hearing a point that I didn't think about somebody made decisions in the analogy for the violinist that the violinist couldn't have made on their own, right? Because it sounds like the violinist is comatose. They kidnapped you in the middle of the night, attached you to the violinist. That's an interesting thought. Yeah. Correct. Yep. Yeah. So without mocking the analogy, which is easy to do, I hear you guys. I think if we can come back to my second, I think is a good argument, is ordinary care versus extraordinary care. Wouldn't you say that, let's even bring it back to giving a kidney to someone who needs a kidney transplant. You have two, you give them one. Would we say that that's ordinary care or extraordinary care? Extraordinary care, right? Maybe I could put it like this. I have a responsibility to feed and clothe and entertain, maybe not the third one, and to my children, as long as they're here. You know, I gave one away last year, and now another man. And I told him, I said, you are now responsible for everything for her. Praise God. No, so I had this moment, right? But I have 3 at home right now that are still completely dependent on me for all of the ordinary care. Let's imagine, though, that there is a need for something extraordinary. I am entitled to take care of ordinary needs, but extraordinary needs are not necessarily that case. So there are poor children all around Coatesville, okay? I live near Coatesville. Now, there are moments where my family's participated in some of the Bridge Academy and other places of ministry in the Coatesville area. But I'm not obligated for that kind of care for everyone. There shouldn't be a law that says that any poverty that I could actually take care of anywhere near me, I should take care of. That's extraordinary. What I mean to you is that's compassion that's outside of the realm of ordinary. If I don't take care of my children, they can be taken away from me because I have a responsibility for them, right? So when we talk about the analogy, we're talking about something that is extraordinary versus something that's ordinary. Another way that we could put at it, and this would be the third argument, or answering the argument, would be this: the importance of the parent-child relationship. So this ordinary care comes because you are my child. And there's certain things that you deserve because you are my child, right? Here's another illustration that sometimes you can use that I think is helpful. If you had, and it pushes back on the analogy. Let's imagine that one of you young moms have your infant child kidnapped, taken away from you. You wake up in a cabin. This sounds like a horror film. But you wake up in a cabin out in the middle of nowhere. You wake up, you realize your infant baby's gone. But you hear the cry of an infant baby in the back room of that cabin, and you go back there, and that infant baby, not yours, but it's crying. And then you go into the kitchen, you find plenty of formula, diapers, everything to take care of that baby. Not your baby. You've been a victim. You've been kidnapped. This is how you answer the categories of rape. But let's imagine that you are in that situation, because the rape thing comes back up to this analogy. So it kind of goes against the responsibility side. Let's imagine that you're in this cabin, young mom, your baby's been kidnapped. You got the scenario. You hear the baby's cry in the back room. You got all the care that you need to provide and take care of that baby until somebody comes and helps you. Let's imagine that 3 months later, the authorities come and they rescue you. Give your baby back, and you're excited, and they ask the question, is there anybody else in the cabin? And let's imagine that the woman answers, we won't say it's you, the woman answers, there was. And then they find out that that baby had cried, but you had never fed it, you had never taken care of it, because it wasn't yours, and you were the victim of rape, or you were the victim of, in this case, in the analogy, you were the victim of having your baby kidnapped. So is there an amount of care that we believe that people should provide for another human being that's just ordinary? It's just compassion. It just shows humanity. You had all that you needed to take care of that infant, even though it wasn't yours, and you chose not to. Right? You see there? So the culpability that we're using in that illustration is to say, so let's say they throw out the, what about rape victims? Well, we believe that there's still a responsibility that we have, even when they're victim of something horrific, to take care of another human being. And then finally, the cause of death is another way of illustrating this. The cause of death would be, in the analogy of the violinist, if you take away the plug and you go along with the story, they're unplugged from you, what happens? According to the story, they die. So we're saying that in the analogy, that person, unless there is some type of extraordinary intervention being plugged up to your body, they are not going to what? Live. The difference in the analogy is the baby is not needful of anything extraordinary. They're just simply needful of an ordinary protection in its environment that was designed for it. And that brings us up to the other analogy that's kind of thrown out there, is connected to it, the kidney analogy. The kidney analogy is this way. So let's imagine that your child needs a kidney. And you have the exact kidney that they could have, the same type of kidney, blood type, everything. So you could donate them a kidney. You have two, you could donate one. But are you obligated to do that? Yes or no? Now, if the baby dies as a result of not having, or child dies as a result of not having your kidney, are you responsible for killing that child? Okay? Now, would it be a great, gracious, almost normal thing for a parent to do? Yes. But we would not hold them culpable, right? But the difference between a kidney and a uterus is quite large. A uterus is designed specifically to protect the life of that baby for 9 months. That's what it's designed for. It's not a part of your body that is designed for other things. So like a kidney, I would donate a kidney to my child. That is something that was designed for what? My body, that I am willingly giving over to their body. But the difference with a uterus and a kidney is this. The uterus was designed not for your body, but for what? Another body. See what we're saying? So we're now just talking anatomy. We're saying the cause of death with not giving a kidney versus the cause of death of killing something in the environment that was designed for them, not the same thing. Okay? So unplugging the violinist, this is extraordinary care. I was not designed to be their life-sustaining body. So this is extraordinary. If I decided to do it, fine. If I decide not to do it, I should not be held morally culpable. However, if I were to kill them in their safe environment, let's say their home, what have I done now? I've taken their illustration and I've turned it on them to say, listen, this is not about the cause of death being something that, because I didn't do extraordinarily, philanthropy in terms of donating my body to sustain them. What I've done is I've taken an environment that was designed for who? For another body. So the kidney and the heart and the lungs and all of your other organs, none of those can be a fair comparison to something that was specifically designed for what? For another what? Another body, right? So that's how we would deal with the violin argument. Anybody else want to add to that? So the kidney argument is just saying, listen, this is not a fair comparison because one body part was designed for another body. Others were designed for the body of the mother in this case. So, yes, Robin. Correct. Correct. I'm glad you clarified that. So we're saying that the kidney illustration is the kidney is a chronic situation that if not addressed in extraordinary measures by somebody who's being, generous, they're going to die. Right. Whereas abortion is the taking of the life of someone that in their environment, had you not taken them, would have all likelihood lived a life. Correct. Good point. Matthew. Yeah, it's a good point, Matthew. I think the answer there is exactly what you're saying, that it's a horrible thing for someone to be raped or through incest to be pregnant. It's a horrible thing. That's common ground. It's a tragic situation. But now to have another victim as a response is what we would say. We now have another life to talk about. We have another body to talk about. Yeah. Good. Anything else you want to say to that? A little further on this whole argument is using power responsibly. There's the no other guardian responsibility. This goes along with that third argument, the importance of parent-child relationships. Just a little further on this. Just the 3 points that are usually given. You are the only person in the immediate geographical vicinity of the child. So this argument goes this way, that even if you won't concede that you have a special responsibility as a parent, we would consider the de facto guardian category for all adults to take care of children. We're seeing some of this in Ukraine right now, aren't we? The protection of children or trying to get them out of harm's way, even if you're not their parents. There's a de facto guardian nature. I know we have it here at this church. It doesn't surprise me that we have it here at this church, but it ought to be kind of part of humanity. That if I'm around a minor and their parents aren't near, I have a responsibility to protect them, right? I may never meet them again. I might not even know their name, might not even get their name. But because I'm an adult, I have a responsibility to what? Protect the child. So the argument goes like this. You're the only person in the immediate geographical vicinity of the child, so you have a responsibility as a de facto guardian to take care of that child. Also, you are able to help the child. So if that's the second thing's true, and finally, the help the child needs amounts to ordinary care, then there's a general consensus in almost every civilized society that adults who are the only one in the geographical vicinity that could help, they could legitimately give help. Maybe they're the only one that could give help. And the help that's required is not extraordinary. It's just normal protection. Maybe it's normal feeding. I use the illustration of you've been locked up in a cabin and you've been a victim because your child has been kidnapped, but you have the opportunity to take care of another child. Human societies, civilized human societies say that you have a responsibility, a de facto guardian responsibility to protect the who? The child. The only reason I give you this argument because I think it's helpful to weigh in on the conscience that every adult has the de facto guardian category if they can help the child with ordinary care. And to have an abortion performed is to relegate or go AWOL on your responsibility to be the de facto guardian in that child's life. So again, this whole argument is answering from few different angles. So I hope you saw the kind of the Socratic approach today. Rather than just giving you the conversation, the big argument is when you hear somebody say, it's my body, it's my choice, what we're going to start with is not all rights are equal. We're not saying equal with all humans, but not all rights are prioritized, right? Then we're going to talk about, if given, the violin analogy. Now, if they don't give the violin analogy, you can still speak to it because that's where this argument comes from. Janine. Point well taken. We're well on our way to becoming an uncivilized society. I think what we're talking about here is that general conscience, and when you're having a conversation, to appeal to, we all, as adults, have a de facto guardian responsibility to care for a child who doesn't have another guardian parent to care for them. And so one of the reasons why I'm pro-life is I have a de facto guardian responsibility to help people realize that you are killing another human being by abortion. Well, we ran out of time for our little activity, so that means you have homework. So if before next week you could work through some of these activities, that'd be great. All right. Thanks, folks. We're going to go ahead and end. Oh, by the way, we have 2 more weeks of class, and as I said, if you will finish out the full 2 weeks, I have a gift for you. It's kind of like a graduation gift that I'll give you on the 20th, all right? So, and next week is going to be really hard to get here because you're going to lose an hour of sleep. But plan ahead. Maybe go ahead and put your clocks forward tomorrow and just go ahead. No, don't do that.